anything ever heard of the word or the practice or system of permaculture? Any familiarity with it? Anybody? I can only see like 4 people, so if you do, hop in. Nope, cool. That means we're like square one, which is awesome. All right, so what we're gonna do today is do some intros. I don't know how many of you guys know me. I tend to just kind of blend into the background in a lot of these festivals when I'm selling stuff, but I've been doing them for a while. We'll submit some quick intros, the presentation, or if you guys listen to Druidcast, Dave the Bard calls that the talky bit. And then we'll do some follow-up and questions if we have time, whatever stuff that we glossed over or you have any further questions or follow-up on, we can go through those so I can geek out pretty hard on this stuff. All right, so for you guys that don't know me, Brian Tant, I am a big nerd over regenerative agriculture. I've been on the pagan path for about 28 years, which makes me seem really freaking old. Empty nester, beekeeper, farmer. Some of you guys have bought soap from me in the past, candles, jams, jellies, some produce. I've sold wine, meads. Introvert and then getter doner. I'm kind of the person that's always doing something, right? And most of the time I bite off too much, but at some point something gets done. And I've been attending Moon Dance and Fall Fling off and on for, I guess, probably 15 years. I really don't know when the first one I came to, but it was back when it was at the Hill. So it's been a while, and it's been cool watching the whole thing evolve. And it was cool, then it got out of hand, and then it got cool again. And sort of now it's this really nice, mellow, everybody knows each other and gets along. It's really cool, nice medium. So let's get that for a second. Why don't we go around real quick and just give me some background on who you guys are. And well, I mean, I know a lot of you, but if you just want to, why are you in this class? What do you hope to get out of it? And if you have any lingering questions that you might have over the topic or just something in general. So whoever wants to go first can go first. And of course, if you don't want to go, you can not go. I don't want to pressure anybody into putting them on the spot. Introverts Anonymous. So, right. You guys are a lively bunch.
I like gardening. Bees are cool too.
Look at Linda throwing me a bone. That's nice. So Linda likes gardening. Anybody else have a garden?
I do.
Right on.
I kill anything I try to grow ever. We don't
allowed to have a garden. I have one oak tree, and if I keep it alive for a full year, I might be allowed to have a garden. Accidentally.
Cool. So I've had 3 people approach me over the years about being students, and I don't take students because I'm a horrible flaky person and it would be a disservice to them. But the first thing I tell them is go plant a garden. Go get your hands in the dirt, get to know the earth, get to know the cycles, get to feel the energies that are ebbing and flowing all the time around you. And then we'll talk about, becoming a student. And of course, they never come back. But that's usually where I start. It's like, if you want to go on a spiritual path that's earth-centric, you should probably get to know the earth at some point. It's helpful, I find, personally, anyway. So permaculture is a structured methodology around some of that stuff. And I as we go through this, for me, it sort of melds and intertwines with the spiritual path. And I think you'll see a lot of parallels in the ethos and the ethics of it and how it's structured and the goals and the cyclical nature of it. A lot of it parallels very closely with earth-centered spiritualities. So to start off with, we've got some problems, right? You got pollution, famine, war, racism, pandemics is the current big one, violence, monoculture, which is a big problem, climate change, government corruption, inequality, food and water security all over the world, getting worse. Actually, some food and water security in the States now. I don't know if you guys are doing ClickList or not. It's pretty tough to get groceries these days if you're looking for something specific. Unemployment is about to be a massive issue from COVID. Financial issues are coming for sure. We got human trafficking problems. We got population issues, terrorism, civil war, child labor, Tiger King, big one that is like a huge blight on the world. So like this is a lot of stuff, and I'm sure we could sit around for like an hour and just bang out shit that's wrong and stuff that's terrible in the world, and we'd all be right. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's going wrong. So the question is then, like, do we sit around and bitch, which, you know, there's merit there, especially if you get a couple good beers going, and it's kind of nice to sit around and vent and, you know, solve the world's problems, or do we do something? And so two guys in Australia, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, decided to do something, right? And my cat agrees. That's great. So let's talk about some stuff around energy use, right? This is sort of nerdy, but it's very easy and quick. Right, so over here, can you see my, oh, look at that, you see my mouse. So going up here, we have energy and resource use, which corresponds to population and pollution. All these things go together, and the higher they go, the worse off we are, right? Time is along the x-axis, right? So back in history, way back, things are pretty sustainable because there wasn't a whole lot of people around, and we weren't like, you know, exponentially using resources. As time went on with the Industrial Revolution, things escalated very quickly. We got the baby boomers here, and we're right at this part here, right at the top of the bell curve. And some people will call this peak oil, peak civilization, peak plastic, whatever. It's really, the way I see it, as a time to make some decisions, right? Because it's sort of an inflection point. It's a crossroads. You know, we have the option of keeping on, in which case we're going to exhaust our resources. We're going to cause great damage to supporting systems. We're going to cause damage to species and diversity, and we're going to ultimately fuck ourselves, because that's the only way that can work out, is we just keep down the way we're going. It's not sustainable. It's not regenerative by any stretch. And it ultimately will end in this brown line here, which is collapse. And we don't want to do that collapse, right? Even though our political structure seems hell-bent on it. The other option is we have this techno explosion, right? We have this second technological revolution. Maybe that's AI, or maybe it's robotics, or some nanotechnology, or quantum computing, or whatever. And then that curve just keeps on going up. I don't know if that's a great thing or not. It might be. We solve a lot of problems with technology, so it could be a way to go for a while. I don't think it's something that can go on forever. The offshoot of that is that maybe we hit some cool technology, and it's like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures, where they had the crazy guitar riff that just saved the world. Some technology comes along, and we stabilize our society, and we are able to endure for forever and ever and ever, because we have this technology that's, you know, great and solves everything. Not sure how likely that is, but it's an option. Then we have this trail here, which is permaculture, and this is designed to do a slow. Geez, man, can't fucking. All right, it's designed to do a slow decline over time of resource utilization. And make things a little more sustainable. Not back here where at 10,000 years where there's no people, but something that's manageable, so that we're only making enough crap that the earth can deal with it, and we have some longevity in our society. This is kind of where we're going. So the idea with teaching permaculture and shifting these views and establishing these systems is we want to do what we can to make this go down and make something for my kids and my grandkids, right? And your grandkids too as well. So there's a guy named Jeff Lawton. I don't know if you guys know who he is. He's real big into permaculture. He's like the permaculture dude right now. He's big. He's got a ton of videos on YouTube. I'd urge you to check them all out. One in particular is this one I put on here, Greening the Desert. If you guys haven't seen it, it's pretty profound. So just to quickly go through the premise and what the end point of this methodology is they took a big swath of land in Jordan that was dead. I mean, just dead earth. The ground had been salted. There was nothing growing, literally dust and sand. And over a series of years, they employed these techniques and they regenerated that area naturally. And they were doing things like growing figs, growing olives. The area came back to life. And then, of course, they ran out of money in Jordan. They just kind of shit all over it. But it was an excellent proof of concept that proved at scale that this can work, right? So I would encourage you to check out this video if you haven't. It's pretty amazing. It's a real like eye-opening video. But Jeff says over and over and over again that all the world's problems can be solved in a garden. I don't think that's wrong. I think that pretty much if you look at any problem we have, whether it's war, racism, famine, inequality, all this stuff comes back to resource constraints, right? At the end of the day, if everybody has enough to eat and everybody has resources that they can manage their life, a lot of these problems either lessen or go away. And so that's the goal of permaculture, is to provide abundance through mimicking natural systems, right, and manipulating them in certain ways. So the definition that I go with, and you can look up definitions all day long on permaculture because it's sort of this nebulous thing and it has many different applications, but it's a design system. It's a design methodology, and it models ecological systems, and it applies natural principles to how things are set up, right? So it can be used, typically it's looked at as a landscape agricultural type of thing, and that's the primary use. But once you get a familiarity with the system, it can apply to other things. It's a methodology that can be used for designing businesses. Your spiritual growth can be plotted through permaculture. In fact, I don't know if you guys know Heather Jo Flores of Food Not Lawns. She's a great book if you haven't seen it. She has a permaculture course that is all about inner permaculture and growing your own abundance, from your own internal fulfillment and whatnot at that area. So it's that was my lovely wife. So it's characterized by a few things: pattern usage and pattern observation. So we look to nature for patterns, and we apply a design, and we apply it ethically, right? So it's a big deal. Permaculture is a lot of ethics and stuff. It's very centered on polyculture, right? So we think the more different things, the better, right? And we look at those inter and intra relationships between all those things. Bill Mollison, who's one of the founders of this, has often been heard saying that permaculture has nothing to do with the things, it's all the connections that the things have. And that's where the theory and the methodology is, in connecting all these different things. And then most of all, it's about doing and making solutions that are self-apparent, or really discovering solutions that are already there. And there's a thing in permaculture where we say the problem is a solution, right? So, for example, if you don't have a slug problem, you have a duck deficit, right? That kind of stuff. So in permaculture, there are 3 ethics, right? And these are moral principles that the whole thing is based around. And this is a loose framework that we'll build from later on, right? So there's these 3 ethics. And these are care of the people, right? So we want to care for our fellow brethren. We want to care for the earth, and we want to care for the future, right? And so these 3 elements, these 3 driving forces, are what shape the whole design process from end to end, right? So it falls apart without any one of these. And you'll see, if you get into studying it, you'll see that future care is often called fair share, or it's called return of surplus, or there's a lot of different names for it. I tend to go away from fair share because that can come with political connotations, and I think it's just better to say that once you have resource allocation, you're caring for the future regardless, right? So once you have that stuff taken care of, the future sort of falls apart. And as a father, my kids are growing up. My kid just got her doctorate, and that's really kind of weighing heavy on me. It's like, what kind of world am I going to leave them? Is it going to be a shit show? Maybe. Will I be able to equip them with something to handle it? I don't know. We'll see. But this has been something I've been very passionate about for a while. So you have the ethics, right? These 3 ethics that are very universal, very basic, and they apply to the whole thing. From within those ethics, we have 12 principles, right? And these are just tenets that are a little more detailed, and they're the foundation for the design methods and mechanisms that we employ. This might get a little dull, so just bear with me. It's kind of long, but we're going to go through the 12 principles because it's important to understand these things before you start to look at the cool stuff, right? Because there's a lot of cool stuff in permaculture, a lot of really neat things. But if you don't understand the foundational elements, it's not very useful. So this is the original. This is actually an excerpt from Dave Holmgren's 2002 book, Permaculture. And these are the 12 principles here. And they're governed by the ethics, right? So later on, we'll see a visual representation that shows all these together and how they interact. But we'll just go through them real quickly, one by one, right? So the first one, and probably the most important, is observation, right? We want to look at something before we do anything. Before we go out, I'm going to say, I want to plant a garden. We're going to stop. We're going to look at that space, and we're going to see what's happening there, what's going on, what forces are at play, what's the prevalent winds, what's the solar aspect. And these are things that these are forces that are going to interact and influence how that piece of area behaves. And so it behooves us as a designer to work with those forces, not against them, and channel them if we can. So we can learn a lot from nature, and not just for gardening, but also how we apply to our lives. I think that resonates a lot with this community, is that we look to natural cycles, we look to, you know, the moons, the seasons, and we sort of resonate with that cyclical nature that we see in the natural world. So I don't think I have to go too far on that one. But if you look here, this is a picture from my back pasture, right? This is just like standing at one of my fence lines. And you can see there's a lot going on here. You can see a lot of trees and a lot of stuff like that, but you can see there's a lot playing out if you kind of look at it. You've got a whole series of succession that's going on here. We have this old pine growth, not really old, but it's original pine growth of the area. And pine gets succeeded by or succeeded by deciduous trees, right? So we have these broadleaf shrubs that are taking over the area because deciduous trees are more efficient. We have grasses. We have this encroaching on the grass area. We have other taller deciduous trees back here as this encroaches. It's just happening very slowly by our reference, right? But this is a whole, as far as trees and plants go, this is a pretty violent revolution taking place here, where we have these pine trees that are getting pushed out by the more efficient, longer-term hardwood plants, right? So this is just kind of the stuff that you would think about when you observe, is like, what's happening? You know, where does the sun come up over here, and how does it influence where these things are growing? What's the prevalent wind? Where is that coming from? Are there fire hazards we need to be concerned with? That sort of stuff. So these are things that you want to think about when you observe stuff. The second principle is catching and storing energy. Does anybody know what these are? This is kind of a different take on solar. Any ideas? Any energy geeks out there? Solar geeks?
Aren't those the ones that follow the sun?
They are. These are very interesting. So you don't see these too often because solar, when you say solar, everybody thinks of photovoltaic cells, right? The solar panels you see on a roof. This is a parabolic curve. And in here, that's a little rod, and it contains a solution like glycol or some kind of chemical solution. And this just gets very hot, right? So this is a parabolic curve that focuses all the sun's energy on like a magnifying glass. So this is a solar array that captures heat and doesn't directly convert to electricity. So this heat can be stored in water. It can be stored, it can be converted to steam. It can be stored as in a battery, all kinds of stuff. So I put this out here because, you know, when you say the sun is the most abundant source of energy, it is, but there's multiple ways of capturing that because everybody sort of gets tunnel vision into that solar panel view. And solar panels are great, but there's other ways to catch that energy and store it for later use, right? So things like hay is an excellent example. And that's why we say make hay while the sun shines, because hay is really just a solar battery, right? So we're taking the energy that the sun is providing to our plants. The plants are metabolizing that and storing starches and nutrients, and we're cutting them down and storing them for later in the winter when our animals don't have anything to eat. And so that's sort of a delayed thing. So it's like an energy or biological battery in that sense. This is another way to channel energy, right? So we have the sun, which if you want to call that the yang energy, right? Then the rain would be the yin. So we have, this is a quick example. This is something called a rain garden. Some of you guys may have done this or variations of this or seen it. In the Southeast, we don't have much of a problem with rain so much. They do have it in other areas, but rain is really not something we have to worry about right now. Climate change, who knows? So we have rain that comes through here, it goes channeled into this garden. And the whole idea with this is we want to take this water and we want to capture it. We want to store, we want to store this water as biological energy here. We want to slow it down so it infiltrates the groundwater. We want to take this organic matter that comes here and we want to enrich this soil for later use. There's a whole lot of things that harnessing this water can do. And just as a general rule, in permaculture, when you look at how to handle water, right? We say, okay, the water comes from uphill this way. The general rule of thumb is you want to make that water go as slowly as possible, and you want to make it take as long a path as possible through the landscape so that the landscape has time to absorb it, so that it doesn't carry away nutrients, that sort of stuff. So that the changes that water puts into the environment are positive. So we want a net abundance, in other words. So the third principle is, why are we doing all this in the first place? Because we want to get something out of it, right? There's no point in doing agriculture if it doesn't produce anything. So we want to produce a yield. The idea is that, industrial agriculture and factory farms, they also produce a yield, right? But there's a lot of side effects to that, and they're usually bad. They're ecologically destructive. They're not sustainable. They breed disease. It's really not a good way to do things. So the idea of this is you have an elegant design, and that elegant design will pay off as a yield, right? And that can be applied to other things too. So that you want to have, when you invest your time in your life, you want to have a yield of productivity or happiness or things of that nature. So just something to think about there. This is a great example of obtaining a yield. I mean, there are tons and tons and tons of yield in this this guild, is the word for it. But you've got some squash plants here. You've got corn. You've got sunflowers. You've got all kinds of stuff here. It looks like you've got a little watering thing there. There's probably some gravel or some water distribution system under here. There's drip irrigation. All this stuff. Looks like there's squash there, maybe watermelons. I'm not sure over here. Lots of stuff. And this is a very intensely grown area, right? So this is an example of a permaculture guild where we have all these things working together, and they produce an abundance that they wouldn't. Say, for example, if you just had this stand of corn off to the side, it probably wouldn't be as productive as you would see here, like it is there. If you guys have any questions along the way, just toss them in the chat, and we'll pop through those when we finish. The fourth principle is self-regulation and feedback, right? So in anything we do, we want to stop and look, and we want to see, did that suck? Was that a stupid thing to do, right? And that's just a thing that I see a lot of people, especially in my line of work, that just have nose to the ground, and they're like on a mission, and they never stop to look around, and they never stop to see, like, is this stuff I'm spending my energy on, is it worth it? Is it giving me a return? Is it bettering my career? Is it bettering my workplace? It's important to stop and look at things that change and take that as feedback and be like, okay, maybe we can do things a little differently, or maybe what we're doing is great. I've always found that I learn the most when I really fuck stuff up royally. So there's a place for that. It's not pleasant, but there's a place for it. And by analyzing what we're doing, we can look to make small improvements, right? So things that we always try to do is, from time to time, we look at our garbage. Are we throwing out stuff that we shouldn't be throwing out? Are we throwing out stuff that we could be reusing? How is our composting? Am I terrible? Is the compost like a piece of crap? Is it not working? Would it be better fed to the chickens? That sort of stuff like that. So we want to make sure that what we're doing is effective And we do that through stopping and critical examination. This is an example of a bad thing, right? So it's possible that, if you guys can't see that, did that just lock? It did just lock. Sorry. It's possible that some of the stuff in here, maybe I threw away. I don't know. Plastic now, we just toss it in landfills, or it goes sort of halfway to China, or it ends up in the ocean. And this is a seagull that presumably died from ingesting plastic trash. I don't know where this is. There's a famous photographer that took a lot of these pictures, but if you ever wonder like what choices matter, this really resonates hard. It's like, wow, I see this and we're like, man, we have really, really messed up. And so we're at the time here where it's like, well, we can do things differently. Do we want to? Do we have the political will to do it? I don't know. Fifth principle is value renewables, right? So we want to make sure that renewable energy that we take advantage of, and this is something that's sort of technology centric in many cases, but it can also be passive, right? So it also could be, in this picture, we have solar panels, which are photovoltaic panels. They take sunlight and convert it directly to electricity for usage to offset our consumption, or to store for later. I've done some solar stuff in the past with people, and the first thing that I tell them, because people are really excited with solar, right? It's because it's cool. It's cool stuff, and there is a definitely awesome factor to it. But your money is way better spent on really boring things like insulation, or double pane windows, or landscaping that will handle sun better, that will block the sun at certain times of the year. So you want to have the baseline energy consumption so that when you do put in solar, you don't have to offset as much, so that what you do put in is much more effective and you don't require as many resources, even though it's not as fun, because a 20 kilowatt array is pretty awesome. There is some really serious geek factor to that, but to look at it correctly, you want to make sure that all your baseline stuff, that you minimize the consumption on the front end before you try to offset it, right? And so that sort of speaks to the larger of what are we using that's not renewable. Gas is a huge thing. I drive a car. I don't drive a car very much because I work from home, but I drive a car, and there's no replacing that gasoline. Once it's burned up, it's burned up, right? So eventually that has to run out. So electric cars are something to look at. Eventually the elements that go into electric cars are going to run out, or they're going to get very expensive or prohibitively costly. So it's a constant search to try to find things that are renewable, that can replace things that are being consumed and generating waste, right? So solar is probably the main example of that you see in modern homes. Waste, right? And this picture, I actually spent a lot of time getting the pictures. This is all like stock photos, but I really dug pretty hard for these. This picture really, really pisses me off, right? And so the whole idea is like, you just want to have as little waste as possible, because waste is a wasted resource. It's a resource that's not utilized. And the thing that really irks me is if you look at, you've got all these happy people up here, and they're just kicking around, and this is awesome, they're having fun, and just have this big pile of trash. But the thing about this pile of trash is like, how much of that pile of trash do you think is recyclable or compostable, right? I'm looking at it, I'm thinking like 80% of that doesn't even need to be there. It could be recycled. It could be, put to better use. It could be made into, bedding or something like that for worms or chickens or whatever. It could have another life. It could be reused in a way that breaks it down into its more fundamental elements so that it can be recycled to the earth. And we just don't give a damn. I mean, this irks me so hard when I see this kind of stuff. So the idea is we're never going to get to zero waste, right? Because it's just not possible. We're not living in caves. And there's a lot of us, right? So maybe if there was a third of the people that were, we could do with a zero waste, and we could have the earth like handle what we're doing. We're just not going to get there. But we damn sure should try, I think. I mean, there's nothing wrong with making a solid effort to generate as least waste as possible. So something to think about there. And then stepping back from like the moral high ground, when we go back to design, we want to look for patterns. Patterns are everywhere in nature. And when we study nature and we look for things, they will emerge as patterns, right? Even if it's a pattern we can't see. Because nature is millions and millions and millions of years old. Nothing just started. So everything has been in some kind of cyclical nature or cyclical process before, whether it's too slow to see, whether it's not obvious, whether it's too small, we don't know, but it's there, right? So even down, if you look at this, these are all succulents because I think it's just cool. All of these, if you even want to go down to the molecular level, all of these elements have been recycled at some point. And you can see here, there are a number of nested patterns, right? So we have circles, we have petals, and we have, if you back up, you have this larger vein of color that runs through a more subdued hue. So it depends upon how far you're standing away from a pattern as to what it actually looks like. So you could come in real close, and this is why this is a really cool example. You could come in really close to one of these plants and you could see some patterns there, right? But you could back up also, and even if we backed up further, we could see other patterns emerge. So we could see as the detail decreases and the fidelity, goes down, we could see other patterns emerge. So it's a matter of perspective and how you look at patterns as to how they emerge and how you interpret them, right? And this can apply to gardens. This can apply to everything. Patterns are just everywhere. Patterns of behavior are huge. If you've got somebody in your workplace that's a jerk, they're probably going to continue to being a jerk because that's their pattern behavior. These are just some examples of patterns that I found that seem to be very profound, obvious ones in nature. Circles, spheres, honeycombs. If any of you guys are beekeepers, we have ants digging, doing a bridge here. We have corals, fungus. We have, I think that's like slime mold or something. All of these things exhibit patterns, and a lot of these patterns are repeatable across species, right? So we have here like a branching pattern. So we see here's the main resource trunk, and then you have smaller resource trunks that go out of it. That pattern repeats almost everywhere, and you can see it over here even if you want to look at that. Main resource trunk, resources are allocated elsewhere. Same here. If you look at rivers, they look exactly like that. Rivers go from larger distributed little veins of lesser concentration to larger concentration, smaller veins. So these are things that as we look at water and as we look at how things move through the landscape, we need to understand that they will follow these patterns. And we need to understand how those patterns will manifest. Principle 8 is to integrate and not segregate, right? So when I say that, I'm not really speaking so much of like the racial, ethical context, even though that's important. More along the lines of, it's better to have a whole bunch of stuff crammed together in a loose order than it would be to have like neat little rows of here's a field of corn, here's a field of soy. None of that works very well. It's not sustainable and it's incredibly damaging to the land. So the more that we have and the more those systems work together, the more resilient they become. So polyculture is kind of the short word for that. But it can also apply to organizations. I mean, the strength of any organization or any group is in its diversity, right? It's because the idea is that if one unit fails or one element fails, the others are resilient in different ways that they can offset that. And is anybody a beekeeper? Any beekeepers in here? Right. So you probably know about that queen polyandry is very important to the survival of a hive, right? So the more drones that a queen mates with, the more distribution and different sperm genetic material she has to make bees with, right? And so the idea is that if she has a whole bunch of different genetic material and something comes along like a disease and wipes out a bunch of bees, that the bees are different enough and diverse enough that all of them won't be affected. So that's the general idea, is that diversity lends strength and resilience. And then the idea is, of course, with Principle 9 is to use small solutions. Start small. I've taught permaculture classes in the past, and people have come up to me afterwards like, this is so awesome. I want to build the most beautiful, this huge thing. And it's like, stop, just start with, you know, go with, God, who's like the square foot garden. I forget who that guy is, but the square foot garden was a thing where you just took a little plot and you broke it out into square feet and then you garden that. And then once you got good at that, then you can go bigger, right? So we want to make sure that what we're doing small, we can scale. So this is a good example of a windowsill garden, right? You want to get into gardens, I want to grow my own food. Start with a flower pot and start there and get good at that and then scale out. Because it can be very frustrating and demoralizing to fail. And I'm having actually my discussion with this with my brother right now, because he was like, "Oh, the world's ending. I need to plant a bunch of flowers and a bunch of food," and he'd never gardened anything before in his life. And so he went out and bought hundreds of dollars worth of plants, and I think about half of them are dead now. So he's pretty discouraged by that. Had he started smaller, because, you know, plants are still available, he might have not been so discouraged and demoralized over the process or the progress of his garden. So now the end result is like he's probably not going to garden next year because he blew himself up. This is a good example of starting small. This is called a keyhole garden because it looks like a keyhole. If you were to look down on the top, it looks like a keyhole. And the reason they do this keyhole thing is so that all of this area is accessible. And if you look here, there's a tube that goes down in the bottom of it in the middle, and that's for compost and watering and all kinds of stuff. So this is probably layered with different stuff. I don't know the build of this flower bed, but it's probably layered, and this goes all the way down to the bottom, and it's a way to feed nutrients to the worms and all the other microbes down here and let them enrich the soil. But this is something that anybody can do. I mean, these are just cinder blocks. I mean, I have cinder blocks laying in my yard, like various places. These are cheap. They're like $2 a piece or something. If you wanted to get into gardening, you wanted to get into permaculture, start with this. I mean, if you can get this working, then you can do it somewhere else. You can do 2 of them, you can do 3, you can do 4. You can make different variations of it. You can explore different designs and get abundance without having too many losses and being discouraged.
Is it okay if I take a picture of that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I would love to show my parents who I am.
There's a lot better examples of this one's actually kind of ugly because I put it in there because I think it's something everybody could do, and it doesn't have to be pretty to work.
Thank you.
Yeah, so function over form. We're getting towards the last of the principles, guys. I wanted to plow through this as painlessly as possible, but there's just no way to do it. Diversity. Don't put all the bags in one basket. So this is something that's like, we talked a little bit about that with, what was that, principle 8, with the polyandry and poly stuff working together and providing resilience that's kind of the larger than the sum of its parts. This is the idea of a forest garden, or a guild, as we call it. These are, so you have this space, and this space has horizontal area and it has vertical space also. And the idea is that in this one space, we can get a lot of diversity, and we can get a lot of production. We can have things on the ground that are producing tubers. We could have turnips, onions maybe. We can have herbaceous plants, bushes, berries, whatever. Some fruit trees, like maybe a peach tree or something, some climbing vines, and then a bigger walnut tree, right? And this is just an example. The more stuff in here, the better, the more resilient it becomes. So, and the idea is that stuff that's not very resilient will kind of work itself out, because we do have selective pressure in here. These things are always going to be working under the survival of the fittest model. And the idea is that you just enable that to be more effective. So this is a really, really good example of munching all this stuff together in diversity, right? So there's probably a path through here somewhere, but you got all kinds of stuff, right? You got like conifers here, looks like a spruce or a fir or something like that. All these flowering things, that might be some kind of cherry right there. Other stuff going on, some grasses, maybe lavender, maybe some butterfly weed right there, all kinds of stuff. Echinaceas right there. The idea is in this ecosystem, and this is an ecosystem, this has got a lot of stuff going on. If something comes along, like say a blight, right? Let's say there's an echinacea blight for whatever reason, and it kills off all the echinacea. Well, if this was all echinacea, it would just be a dead spot, right? But since it's not, the echinacea might die back, and then other stuff will fill its place, right? And then they might alter it, or there might be selective pressure on the echinacea that some will survive and repopulate that are more resilient to the blight. So that's just kind of an interesting example of the utmost extreme diversity in a garden. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff going on. And the second to the last principle is edges. Edges are, it's critically important to deal with edges. Edges is where all the action happens. So if you have, for example, a forest, and next to that forest you have a field or a pasture, the most biological activity will be at that edge area. And so we want to maximize edges. So when we have a pond, if you want to maximize edge, you don't use a circular pond, you use something like a squiggly circle, like a flower sort of pinwheel looking form that maximizes the edge area of that pond, and you get more biological activity. That may or may not be what you want to do, but that's an option. The more edges there, the more biologically active an area is. And so when you have these food forests, like this is a food forest garden, there's like, you know, some herbs here and there, probably some sorrel, it looks like maybe. A lot of the stuff is going on right at the edge here. So there's not much, there's a lot more stuff over here going on where this grass meets the edge than there is like over here or back in here. So that's where the action takes place. And so when we go back to our observation principles, if you want to see what's going on, the first place we look is the edge. We're like, oh gosh, you know, so we want to see if there's some kind of animal that's doing something. Typically the animal does stuff around the edges, right? So deer is a really good example of that. They don't just walk around the middle of the forest, they'll skirt the edges of fields. They'll use trails and that kind of stuff. So edges are something to keep in mind. And then this was something that was deeply disturbing, but also I think has tremendous merit, right? So this is, of course, COVID. This is a graduation, a high school graduation or college graduation in Japan, where, of course, the students couldn't be present. And so the school set up robots that kind of did FaceTime things for the students so that they could get that experience of graduating and being amongst their peers, at least in some respect. And it's very similar to what we're doing right now. Like, we can't all be out in the woods frolicking and drumming. So we're doing the next best thing and hanging out on Zoom and having some of those conversations that we might try to have while we were there, right? We're sort of adapting, and we're responding to selective pressure, right? We have a selective pressure right now that, you know, if you hang out together, there's a good chance you could get ill, right? So we don't want to do that. We want to separate and do this social distance thing, but we also want to adapt so that we don't lose lifestyle elements that we enjoy. So we don't lose friendships, so we don't lose community. So these other things, Zoom is a tremendous adaptation to a challenge of distance that we've encountered recently. So I thought this was really profound. This certainly takes it to the extreme, these guys, but it's an example of how change, the response to change, creative response to change, can be very empowering and very effective. So we see that a lot in spiritual practice and in paganism, where we have constant change, and we sort of try to attune ourselves to those changes. You know, the monthly moon cycles, the seasons, the equinoxes, the cross holidays. These are all cyclical changes. And back in the day, when these holidays came about, they had an agricultural basis. So they followed the seasons, right? So the Samhain is like the last harvest. It's not in Georgia, because our last harvest is probably in December, right? So this is an argument I have with a friend of mine a lot, is that you have like these holidays, but then you also have the magic of place, right? So we have a really long growing season in Georgia. Our wheel of the year looks kind of lopsided probably if you were to do that, but then it doesn't work out. If you were to be true to the basis of the holiday, you would celebrate Samhain probably in November or December here in Georgia and Alabama. But that's a whole separate religious discussion. Anyway, so that's the last principle. So all these things come together, right? This is the whole kit and caboodle. So in the center, you have these ethics, right? And fair share, I like to call that future share, because fair share has some political drama with it right now. Care for the earth, care for the people, and then we have all these principles around here. And then within those, we have these domains, right? So if we look at just care for the earth, we have, land and nature stewardship, land tenure, community governance rather. If we go down here, future share is kind of like it has an economic tone to it. So you have financial economics. We have using small solutions because they're more efficient. We have patterns and details for efficiency there. We have zero waste, all this stuff. And then that rolls up from this economic aspect to, if we have these things in order, we have an element of well-being. Culture and education. This is upside down, it's kind of hard to read. Self-regulation, tools and technology, all these things sort of meld together. And this is not absolute. Some of these fudge back and forth because there are very few straight lines in nature. But this is a really good representation. And you'll hear this called the permaculture flower. And there's several different representations, but this is the most complete one I could find that encompasses all this stuff. And we didn't discuss the domains because I want to keep you guys awake. There's a lot to go through. We're just really trying to hit the 101 stuff. Now, when we get into, we got all the theoretical garbage stuff that is all abstract. We got that out of the way, right? So we have an understanding of the ethics, we have an understanding of the principles, and we understand why we design things the way we design things. And this is going to take an agricultural tilt because that's the most common use and that's how it's employed. So permaculture has this concept of zones, right? And it's very, very easy. You have zone 0 and zone 1. They're sometimes combined depending upon who's doing the design. And that's the home. That's your dwelling. Zone 0 is the hearth. It's the center of the energy in your design. That's where you live. That's where all the animals live, your dog, cats, whatever. That's the center of all your interaction with the landscape. So that's zone 0. Zone 1 is the garden that's right outside your door, the herb garden, right? Does it, like, people have, do you guys have a kitchen garden where you have just a bunch of herbs like right outside? You get to snip out for a little bit, cut some oregano or whatever, bring it inside. That's your zone 1. These are areas in the yard or the property that you're visiting several times daily. And that may be for various reasons. It might be because you have an herb garden there. It might be because you have baby chickens there. It might be because it's the mailbox. Who knows, right? So we don't necessarily care why we're visiting them, but we know that we're visiting them a lot. And so that would be our zone 1, right? And further out is our zone 2, where we have, maybe we visit that once or twice. We have a chicken coop. We don't have to hang out with our chicken coop 20 times a day unless we just have chickens. But we go there once or twice, check on the chickens, gather eggs, and that kind of thing. Vegetable gardens, maybe we go out once or twice a day, pull tomatoes. Fruits like peaches that are soft, we want to get those when they're ready. And things that we harvest daily, right? So this is our zone 2. And this is pretty close to the house, but sort of there. And you can see that over here, that's represented by the chicken, strawberries that go quickly, your pears, apples, whatever, things that you want to pull fairly frequently. Zone 3 is the larger areas, right? So we're getting more into fields or large areas of growth, right? So, potatoes, all your melons and squashes and stuff that sprawl out everywhere, those are accommodated by your zone 3. And those would be like stuff that you'd visit maybe once or twice a week, right? There's not like hard logic to this, but it's like once or twice a week when I go there. For me, beekeeping is there. I definitely visit my bees, once a week, typically. I try not to do it more frequently, especially in the summer. It's really hot, but beekeeping fits really well into like the zone 3. And it's great because you don't really want these bees in zone 1 because they become a nuisance. So when bees get into zone 1, I typically get a phone call to come get some bees out of somebody's house. So not only are these effective for you to manage them out here, but they also are better off for themselves being out here. So that you have, let's say, for example, you have chickens out here. You don't really want your chickens in zone 1 because anyone who has chickens knows that everything will be covered in poop. And that's just no fun. We had chickens. We were like, oh, we're going to free range chickens. It'll be so awesome. I'll be like little house on the prairie. And there was like shit everywhere, like within 2 days. So we're like, nope, that's not going to work. If you go to the 4th zone, now we're talking about seasonal visits, right? So maybe every few weeks, maybe, major harvest time. Maybe you have a crop of corn or tomatoes, or not tomato, but potatoes that these things mature slowly, and there's really kind of one big harvest, right? Grazing areas where maybe you overseed once or twice a year. These are your zone 4 things. And then zone 5 is absolute nature, right? So that's the woods. That's the area that we showed early on in this, like the 3rd or 4th slide with that big forest scene. That is the edge of zone 5. So beyond that grassy edge, I don't do any management there for the most part. There's sometimes I'll go back there and I'll cut down a dead tree or a rotten tree or something like that because I want to manage disease. But very rarely will I go out there and actually do things, because I think that place, the unmanaged areas, have the most to teach us, right? Because when we look at stuff and we manage things in our nearer zones, our influence changes how they behave, right? So we don't necessarily learn too much from growing herbs next to the kitchen. We learn more from going out to the edge of nature and seeing how herbs interact with the environment. And so we can take that as inspiration and knowledge and maybe improve how we handle zone 1 and zone 2, right? Here's an example of a very, very high level plan. This was a permaculture thing that was done like in 2012, way back when like Microsoft Paint was the cool thing. So here's like zone 1 is a home and garden. So here you have all the stuff here. Zone 2 is your food forest. So that's things like, you have the trees that you'd harvest here pretty regularly. Over here, you've got livestock and fields where, horses or cows are. Over here, 4, harvest forest. I don't really think that in this case, that's a harvest forest. I think that's more like a zone 5. But that's another thing. You may not have all the zones in your property. You might have, if you have an apartment, you probably don't have natural conservation forests that you have access to right there. You have a zone 1, possibly a zone 2 if you have like a community garden, and that might be it. So you just kind of work with what you have. If you want to look at a more detailed, more modern view of this is something that's a little busier, but you can see here we've got a lot more going on. We've got the zone 1 over here. We've got the houses, we've got the buildings, we've got water catchment, we've got some ponds going on here, parking. We've got the zone 2 is out here, the trees and the orchard. Zone 3 is like a grass where they do goats or whatever. More zone 3 out here for different things. Zone 4 is this larger area that doesn't even really seem to be part of the property. It's just like, hey, we're not doing any of that stuff. And then what's interesting here, I don't really think it shows it that well, but for example, you have a zone 1 that might go all the way out to the edge of your property. It might be, you might have your driveway, or if you go for daily walks or whatever, you have a path or something like that. So there's no set organization of this stuff, right? It could just however you want to do it. The zones serve as a framework for how you would lay out things to make things better. And I can tell you, if you put like we did, we put our compost bins in like way out of the edge of the fence line, and we hardly ever put stuff in them because it's a pain in the ass. So we end up composting very close to the house in worm beds and stuff, even though we were like, oh no, they look great on the fence. Now, out of all the stuff here, we're not going to do all this in this stuff. I just want to touch on this concept very briefly. Sector analysis, right? So we've got the zones, we've got the layout, we know where stuff is, but we've only accounted for that on a drawing. We've only accounted for that looking down and saying, gosh, trees should be here, maybe a pond should be here, things of that nature. It doesn't encompass the whole picture. And so when we look at that, we've got to conduct sector analysis, right? And that sounds really heady, but really all it means is we want to look at the energy flows on the property. And I've had people do designs that included sector analysis that had ley lines. So I'm no expert on where to find ley lines, but this person was, and they put them in the design. Good on you. I couldn't have done it. But you can see here, these are things like, the prevalent, the prevailing winds in the winter, right? And the prevailing winds in the summer. And then how is the access to that? How do these things interact? You have your zones here, in theory. Maybe off to this side, you have a desirable view. You have something you like to look at. So you wouldn't want to plant zone 3 all full of trees right here. You probably want to have that area open. Maybe you have a view over here. Maybe you have, maybe you want to construct a pergola on your house that blocks the sun in the summer and lets it through in the winter. That's a very common practice. So we want to know where the solar aspect is. You know, maybe the sun rises over here and sets over here in the summer or the winter. So we want to know what that is. So these, we just don't want to understand, like, you know, where does water flow through? If there's a rain event, like, does water like go through here? Does it run right by the house? Is there a way we can deal with that that's better? So we want to understand where those energies flow from. And we look at these energies and we say, okay, we can stop them. We can block them from coming down. If we have a prevailing winter wind, we can set up a bunch of trees right here to block it from hitting the house. We can channel it. You know, maybe we want summer winds to cool us off. If these are cooler winds, we could build sort of a V foundation hedge line here to sort of channel those to the house. Or we could just kind of do nothing. So we could just let things play out. So it just depends on how you want to manage energy across the property. Elemental analysis. This is something that this gets all really heady, and you can do all kinds of stuff. But one of the examples that's given a lot is a chicken, right? When someone looks at a chicken, really nobody thinks much about a chicken. But if you look at how a chicken interacts with the landscape and with other elements in the landscape, it's very complicated. So the chicken produces stuff, right? Eggs, meat, feathers. It produces poop by, you know, if you have chickens, you know they produce poop. Methane, it produces CO2, it scratches, it forages, it flies, it fights with other chickens sometimes. You get a lot of roosters, you know how that works out. It has needs, right? So you need to provide your chicken with certain things. And it has certain characteristics like breed and certain levels of tolerance to climate and weather. And there's also breed-specific behavior. So these are all things that govern how a particular element, in this case a chicken, will interact with things. And if you wanted to get further into design, what people actually do is they chart out this stuff. And we want to say, okay, if we have something, let's say, for example, and I don't illustrate this very well, but we have something like, say, a chicken needs shelter, right? Well, we have, or a chicken needs shelter and it produces manure. Well, in this case, we have a tree, which is patterned the same way. A tree provides shade, provides windbreak, it provides shelter. So the chicken could use this, right? And it also requires nitrogen and requires nutrients, which the chicken produces. So in that very simple sense, we have a matrices of needs and requirements and things that are produced. And so the more of these cross connections you can make, the more resilient things become. So ultimately, you'd want something that is supported by at least 2 or 3 elements and something that provides for at least 2 or 3 elements. And if you can get that going across all your stuff, it's pretty spectacular and it's incredibly productive. So these are just some things. If you wanted to get further into the design areas, you'll be mapping out needs, behaviors, characteristics, that kind of stuff, and seeing how they intersect. And then that will all play into the overall design. So all that heady stuff aside, let's take a quick break. Where are we at? We're at 6 o'clock, right? Yeah, because it's central. Do you have any questions? We went through a whole, is anybody still awake? I don't see anybody sleeping. That can be pretty heady stuff. So any questions on any of that stuff? Just fire off, because I can only see like 4 people on my screen.
Would you be willing to share the PowerPoint where we could go back individually and go through that, because it is so much information.
A lot of stuff, right? And this is just the 101 level. Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to share all this stuff. And actually, if you guys, this isn't for everybody, obviously, because some folks will be interested in it. But if you're really interested in this, I have a massive repository of resources, books, videos, all this other stuff that I'm happy to make available to you directly. Just don't share it around.
That would be awesome.
I mean, there's so much stuff out there. So
This is
if you want to just throw your email into the chat, I'll keep that for later, and we'll do that. All right, so this is the cool stuff. After we get all that stuff like dealt with, now we make stuff happen. Now we get the shovel out. Now we get the hands dirty, right? This is where we become our dirty eco hippies. This is where we become like the dreadlock, you know, shirtless guy who hasn't taken a bath in 3 weeks, and we're like, when will the earth? This is where it happens. So we can put all these things into practice in a holistic manner. These are some examples of tools and techniques that are used very commonly, right? Sorry. So this is something called a swale, right? And a swale is a way to catch water. A swale is a ditch, basically. It's a shallow ditch that's built on contour. So, you know, you have these contour maps. Like if you look at geological maps, right? You have the lines that show height and contour and elevation. A swale is built to follow one of those lines. So it's flat across the landscape. And the idea is that the rain comes down and it rolls down into this thing, and this is level across the landscape, and so it slows down the water, right? So we abate runoff, and we grab water, and we hold it there. And depending upon the ground, some people will build swales that are very, very broad and wide and maximize the surface area here to infiltrate as much water as possible. This is one of the things that was very instrumental in grabbing, when I talked about that video, Greening the Desert. Swales was a big piece of how that happened, because Jordan only gets a teeny tiny bit of rainwater a year. So the emphasis on the design was capturing and holding all that water if possible, and recycling as much as it can. So swales are used very, very, not so much really in the Southeast, because we only have a few months where we don't have a lot of rain, but holding water on the landscape and letting it infiltrate the ground makes the landscape a lot healthier. And you can look and see, like my neighbor's house, they have like, they get a lot of runoff from our yard, but their runoff, they just run it through the land. And there's a strip of green that goes through their yard, and the rest of it dies in the summer, right? Whereas my yard stays pretty green because we take that water and we channel it to an area, and then we hold it and we let it infiltrate the ground. And so we have more of a reservoir, what they call a water lens, under here, where our plants can look for it and grab water when they need it. So here's what it looks like in practice. Here's a swale, right? So this is the elevation here. It slopes slightly. The tip of this is above elevation, and water has run off and we've captured it. And now water, and there's another one over here too. So they do this on contour. Now the water is just going to sit there and it's going to infiltrate the landscape. You know, obviously if you live in like South Florida and you get rain every day, this is not really a huge concern. But if you live at somewhere that has seasonal dryness, like, you know, middle Georgia or something like that, or middle Alabama has some dry spells as well, this might be something to concern yourself with, because this can really kind of bridge that gap. You can have things planted here that normally wouldn't be able to tolerate those conditions that you can kind of get away with, because you're increasing the amount of groundwater right here. So this does not increase like deep aquifers. So like your deep water wells, this has nothing to do with that. But it does increase the shallow aquifer, and it makes more water available for longer periods of time for stuff to use. This is, you know, they're planting trees here, and there's a whole like a whole treaty on like what to plant and how to plant on a swale and all this kind of stuff. But just know that it's a cool way to grab water and sequester it on the landscape, right? Here's what it looks like from start to finish. You have like, so here's contour. You can really see that that's a flat terrace, and we've built it up a little bit here, and then we've put some mulch down here, and then you can see we've planted things here to grab the water, and this will just get more and more productive over time, because you'll have things here that have access to good water. We've stopped runoff from going down the hill, and we've sequestered that water in somewhere that it wouldn't normally be sequestered. So normally water runs down a hill. Here we can capture it and force it into the ground. Very cool stuff. This is I forget what it's called. Zaytana Farms. This is Jeff Lawton's farm from a drone picture. And Jeff Lawton, being the master guru of permaculture right now, you can really see how he's implemented swales. So you have a hilltop here, and you can see swales here, and swales here, and swales here, and here. And all this stuff, he's grabbing water as it goes off of the mountain, the hill here, and sequesters it into these ponds. So his swales probably have overflow features that once the swale gets full, it drains into this pond, right? And so we're doing that to even higher because we're putting this reserve. And so the swale then is reverse fed by the pond, and you can use that water more consistently. So that's just kind of a neat. If you really want to see it done at scale, there's some really cool stuff. If you look up contour gardening or farm permaculture, stuff like that, it's people have had the time scale now. This came out in the 70s, and they've had the time to sort of digest it into contemporary landscaping, and they've seen the net returns for these type of design elements, and you're starting to see these implemented in various places to make them productive. Another cool thing, hugelkultur, right? Anybody heard of hugelkultur before? Anybody?
Yes, I've been trying to look into some of that. For
Oh, awesome. Hugelkultur is awesome for where we are. It's awesome. And the cool thing about it is like it has various scales. You can do it big, you can do it little. Obviously the big stuff is more long lasting, whatever. You could do it year to year, whatever. So hugelkultur just means hill culture or high culture in German. And this is an old gardening technique in windy areas or areas that are kind of nutrient poor or that don't get consistent rainfall. Hugelkultur is just a way you take a big stack of logs and you cover it with dirt. And that's basically the gist of it. There's techniques to that and how you would stack it and what you would put in there. But the idea is that after 2 years or so, this wood will start to rot. And if you've ever seen like rotting wood in the forest, you can grab it and just almost squeeze the water. It's a tremendous sponge, right? So what we have here is we have spongy water holding within a hillside. So we have a layer of soil or compost, whatever, that we're making accessible to these plants. And then within that layer of soil, we have a water reservoir that's massive. And I did this. I did a hugel bed a couple years ago, much smaller than this. It was only like a foot high or so, and it was a couple feet wide, just to kind of see how it worked out. And it was awesome. We planted peppers into that, and peppers and eggplants. And if you grow any of those, either peppers or eggplants, you know that in the summer they just wilt, and they need a lot of water to keep them from falling over, right? Now they do like snap back in the evening when the sun like gives them some mercy, but during the hot of the day they will wilt off because they just can't move enough water. This solved that. So I had 100-degree days, sun was beating down on my eggplant, and they were just like, "What's up? I'm an eggplant." It was pretty amazing to watch that. And also, I think through the summer, I might have watered this twice. Now, when I did water it, it was a good soaking because I had to replenish this store. But I think I watered twice. Whereas the rest of our garden, we're watering once a week, that kind of stuff. So it's a tremendous, tremendous resource and technique for if you live in a hot area, if you want to harvest water and release it slowly, hugelkultur is a really cool way to do it. And there's all kinds of ways that you can do this in flower beds. You can do it on hillsides. You can even, if you wanted to get geeky, you could make hugel beds into swales. So instead of just having a ditch, you could have that ditch be based on, and then the water you funnel in here gets stored there, and you have more of those cross connections and more energy harnessing there. Here's kind of a cross section of a hugel bed. This is one way to do it. This person put softer wood here, like the pines and stuff like that, and then based on the hardwoods. And then they put logs here for like better footing, I guess. So that when they reached, if this was pretty tall, you would reach to the top and have better footing here, whatever. Having these little divots here is a really great way to catch the runoff from here in like a little mini swale and then funnel it back into this. And then if I was going to do that, I would actually have this be sort of a bowl so that I could funnel this water back down into this storage. But there's a lot of ways to do it. This is just a diagram. You have like the wood here that holds the water. Then you have layers of mulch and compost. Then you have some soil and whatever. And then you have the plants that you put in there. And you can put some pretty water-hungry plants in these things, and they do really well. So the only thing with this is you have to keep in mind, like the first year that you bury a bunch of logs, a bunch of wood, that's a massive carbon sink, and it sucks nitrogen out of the soil. So you have to offset that with some fertilizing. So the compost tea or something like that, or grass clippings, just that would put nitrogen back into that system to offset that carbon sucking effect is something you want to do as well. Because the first year, this is pretty rough on things that need nitrogen. So just keep that in mind. If you do it one year and it's kind of a pain, it doesn't work out very well, it's because the wood has sucked up all the nitrogen in this environment. So you need to offset that. Just keep that in mind. Here's how it's in practice. You see these are hugel flower beds. And you kind of get the idea of like how these could easily be made in the swales, right? If this was a hillside, we could make these in the swales and we could water our tomatoes and whatever. As you can see here, this is how they look in practice. So you have like the hill. There's debate on whether the top should be flat or rounded. You know, it's a religious discussion, whatever. But you get the idea. So you have this hill with the wood in it, and they're planting things into the side, and that's using the water that's in there. You can do this in flower beds. This could be done very small scale. There's a guy right now, I forget his name, but he's actually doing hugel pots. So he has like potted plants with wood chips in the bottom, which, I mean, I guess if you're gonna have pots, I would just, water them or get one of the self-watering ones with a water reservoir, but that's fairly popular in discussion right now. So, but you can do this with a flower bed here. So you could, take your wood stumps or whatever, and you mulch it and you put stuff on it, and then you have, instead of a hill, you have these sides containing the bulk of that material, and it just works up that way. So that's a viable option as well. And that's it. That's all I got. You guys can wake up now, right?
Dawn?
We did pretty well on the time. We still got like 10 or 15 minutes if we need it. What was that? Oh yeah, you can. It's not really practical because a pot loses so much water. It's just it's not much there, but it can be done. I think if you wanted to. Yep. The only thing is that so the smaller you go with it, the more frequently you have to redo it because it gets used up pretty quick. So if you like, just a bed of wood chips or whatever, that bed of wood chips rots pretty quickly and it doesn't last that long as far as being a water source, right? So if you have like a big, huge 4-foot tall mound and you've got massive tree trunks running through there, that lasts several years. And ultimately that collapses, flattens out, and you have just, stuff there. So
what would be the if you have a relatively small yard? I live in the middle of town and I do have a yard, but it's tiny.
Oh yeah. So let me see if I can do this here. Permaculture is awesome. For small areas. Because you have
a square yard.
You have the ability to manage so much of it so intensely, right? Let's see if we can find some good stuff here. So you have, I'm just here. You guys are staring at a box. I'm sorry. I'm just looking at Google Images, but you can see here you've got. This is a pretty small area here, and I just clicked on that one. I shouldn't have, but. These are all like small permaculture things, and you don't have to employ all these things. How big a yard did you say you had?
Nyan, how big would you say my yard is?
I would think that you could do square box gardening or something like that. What do they call that? I mean, you could probably do quite a bit with your yard space. I mean, depends on how much you want to plant, how much gardens you want.
You really can. Let me give you an example. Does anyone know who the DeReyes family is?
No.
Did someone say yes?
I don't know.
Oh, so I was like, gold star for you, man. That's awesome.
Yeah. No, I've heard of them.
The Dervaeus family, I must have misspelled their name. The Dervaeus family has, I believe it's a 1/4 acre out. They have about a 1/4 acre out in California. And yeah, this is the Dervaeus stuff. Jules Dervaeus. So they have, I think it's a 1/4 acre, and they grow 7,000, a 1/10 of an acre. So they grow 7,000 pounds of food a year on that 1/10 of an acre. Now, it's pretty intensively managed, and they like cram everything they possibly can in there. But
Here, let me show you. Can you see my camera?
yep,
Okay. That is my yard.
it's a river. It looks like a virtual
hold on.
background, maybe. It's very scenic.
Let me figure out how to turn it off.
It's like that's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
No. There we go. So that's my yard. That's what I've got.
Oh yeah, yeah. You can do all kinds of stuff with that.
I also have those, and they get in the way.
Did you say dogs or doves?
I said those, and there are 3 of them running around here somewhere.
Awesome.
Oh, does, like female deer.
No,
No.
those with a T, and yes, they're dogs.
Gotcha. Okay. Sorry, the Zoom audio. But you can see here, this is their homestead, and it's like in the middle of city. This is what it was before, and this is kind of where it's at now, right?
Oh, wow.
Obviously, they, every bit of that is productive, but they wanted to show what could be done, right? And so that's what they do. They make 6,000, 7,000 pounds of food every year, which is they do. They are really big on social media, and they several years ago they caused a stink because they tried to copyright the word urban homestead and caused a big stink in the movement. But yeah, they've got a massive social media presence. They have a podcast, I believe. Yeah, podcast. It's really cool. And there's Jules Dervaeus has some cool videos out about like the whole history of how he did it and what's done there and all that kind of stuff. So it's very fascinating. Just what can be done, but don't think that a small space is limiting in any way. And actually, it's in some ways it's easier because you can manage all of it. Like if you've got 20 acres and you're trying to do that by yourself, I mean, you're talking years, right? You can get all this stuff done on a 1/10 of an acre and probably, a year to 2 years and get something really going strong there. So that's, the less space you have to work with, the more intensely you can work it. It's just a question of how much do you want to put into it, how much time do you have. But I would say even something like this, you would start small. Start on the porch and make sure you get that right, because you don't want to go out and buy $1,000 worth of plants and then have half of them die, because that's pretty demoralizing. Questions, concerns?
I wanted to ask you about, you said you had beehives as part of this.
We do.
Do you use the Langstroth hives, or do you use one of the different systems?
I have Langstroth, so I just use 10 frame Langstroth hives. I run a deep on the bottom, and I run a medium on top of that. Anything above the deep is a medium, so I use all mediums. It's pretty standard stuff.
Right. I just wondered how they fit in with this for you, because I know they can be pretty. It is hard to make them self-sustaining. Let's put it that way.
It is. Fortunately, I'm kind of out in an area where we're really rural, and we plant a lot of. So when we choose plants for putting in, so let's say we're looking at trees. We're looking at basswood trees specifically, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we plant these, one of the things we consider strongly is nectar production, so that we want nectar production to be throughout the year, so that if one species, each species has like its own nectar window, right? So
Right.
blueberries, blackberries produce nectar for a couple weeks, then they're done.
Right.
You don't want to, you want to, if you have those elements, you want to work them into the design so that your nectar, what they call a nectar flow, you're familiar with that,
Right.
is buffered along the way, right? Now, obviously, if you only have a couple acres, you're not really doing much for the bees, but it's better than nothing, you know. I
Right.
can tell you in the fall, we have a lot of basil, and they're all over that basil because there's nothing else really going on. And I think
Yes.
they're getting something out of it. You know, they're pulling something in. So we want to make sure that when we plant stuff, that we pay attention to the nectar succession and the production, so that we prop them up as best we can. And I think if you wanted to step back, like the whole goal is laziness, right? So
Right.
the more I can put these systems to work, the less I have to do. You know, that's a good way to look at it. But the more plants and stuff I can get working together with the bees, the less beekeeping I have to do, and the more honey I get.
Yeah, one thing I've looked into and have not had the chance to implement yet because, well, my bees died last winter and I live on the same property with my parents who are both allergic, so we don't have bees right now. But one thing I'd like to do is do like the thyme fields near them, because that is supposed to cut down a lot on the varroa issues.
I haven't heard that. I haven't heard thyme does that. That's interesting.
One of the big organic compounds you can use to fumigate them.
That's right.
is
Yeah,
actually
thymol.
it's thymol.
Yeah, yeah. I have no
don't know
brain.
that I would rely on it entirely, but
That there has to be some elements that are coming out of that. That's I don't know why I didn't think of that. So I'll definitely that's cool.
yeah.
Yeah, so we manage varroa through oxalic acid. So I vaporize, 2-3 times a year. I make sure there's no brood, and then gas them, basically, and that does really, really well. But it's something you have to do. They just haven't adapted to varroa yet. They're getting better, but it's going to take a while for them to find some level of equilibrium.
Right. I've not done the oxalic acid, mostly because cost is a little prohibitive for jumping in with 1 or 2 hives, but
Yep.
I've done the strips that you hang in there.
Those look really well. You could do, there is, if you look on scientificbeekeeping.com, what's his name? I can't remember his name. Anyway, Randy Oliver. He has an oxalic acid application method that uses glycerin and shop towels. And so what he does is he takes and makes a mixture of oxalic acid and glycerin at a certain concentration or whatever, soaks some shop towels in it, and then it puts the shop towel over the top of the bars, the brood nest. And the idea is that the bees chew up the shop towel, and in doing so, the oxalic acid is distributed to the brood nest.
You said that was Randy Oliver?
Yep. Now there's debate on whether that's effective or not. There's been studies that say both ways, that it works and doesn't work. But I know a couple guys in the local club that do it, and they're like, they say it works great. They haven't treated any other way, and they have no problems with varroa. So I think there's probably something to it.
That's not acceptable.
And it's a very easy way to do it.
I'll have to look into that. I also know that's the one that they want you to wear the big respirator with, right?
Yes. If you vaporize that stuff, you definitely want a respirator on.
Okay, but you wouldn't have to if you used it with.
It will put you in the ER. Like it is rough. Don't get a lungful of that. And if you do use a respirator, use the one with the cartridges that are specifically for organic acids. So they're pink and yellow. The regular ones that come with it don't filter it out.
Okay, not right now, Cesare. I'm going to have this conversation. Okay.
Yeah. If you have asthma or anything like that, you just gotta. It'll tear you up.
Yeah. Desiree, I said, not right now. Please leave it alone. I will show you it after I'm done with this class, if you will wait. If you will not wait, you will not get to see it later. Put it down, please.
Do we have any other questions? Who is participating? We have 12 people in here. Holy, come on. I didn't know that. 12 people.
It's a very subject. So
Yeah.
it's good that a lot of people are very interested in it. For someone like me who kills everything that I try to grow, that's why I thought maybe the mounds would do better, because they kind of self water and stuff like that, and maybe things will stay alive.
Maybe. I mean, you know, there's you know, if you there's no magic to gardening. I mean, there's obviously, if you wanted to take a spiritual approach to it, there is. But if you want it, I mean, there's nothing. You know, plants just need what they need, and so if you can give them that, it's just a matter of knowing that and knowing how to do it. And a lot of times, if you go to like the Master Gardener Club, the local Master Gardener Club, and you ask for a mentor or something like that, a lot of times you can get some suggestions on like, hey, I'm trying to grow comfrey. Comfrey, that's not good. Comfrey grows everywhere. So let's say you're trying to grow strawberries or whatever, and you're like, these strawberries just keep dying. I can't keep damn things alive. What's up with this? And you go to the master gardeners and they're like, yeah, don't grow strawberries because of this thing or that thing or this bug or whatever, and we just can't do it. So there's a lot of knowledge that just isn't immediately obvious with some of this stuff, and tapping those resources, or just the extension agent, the local extension agent is like a gold mine of information. They deal with that all the time. You can and they have programs and classes, and it's all free. Yep.
Cool.
Hey, Leanne, go ahead, Kayla.
That's cool. We have the same background.
Nick, did you
It's
have
like, it's like we're in the same like field with the sky going crazy.
I was going to tell you, Leanne, that Carroll County Extension Office is spectacular. I mean, I've been to a couple in the state, and it's really got good information, good, and helpful as well. Brian, this has been awesome. I got so many great links that I can follow and do. In fact, the other day I made a eucalyptus and I didn't know what it was. I just was thinking, I don't want to fill this box with all this dirt, and this stuff is gonna compost. And so and I happen to put peppers in it. So I thought that was interesting.
It's just, yeah, and it's one of those things where that's a parallel that I think you could apply to a lot of the pagan practices. That some stuff is just self-apparent. You do it because it makes sense, and there's an intrinsic instinctual reason that you do it, right? Like you celebrate the harvest. Everybody celebrates a harvest. They don't know why, but they've always done it, and it's like a thing, right? It's one of those things. Like it's just self-apparent.
Well, I told somebody else to do it too, so now I get to go back and tell them.
There you go. See, you're a mentor now. You've got a mentorship going.
Hey, there's a name to that stuff. Now we can look it up and find out more, and what we like, things you said about the nitrogen and stuff. This is very awesome.
There are so many resources out there. I can't see the chat because I have all kinds of crazy stuff going on. Oh, there it is. Chat. Whoa, look at all the there's questions here. Let's see if there's any questions. Before we do that. Okay, yeah, the eucalyptus in a pot. I got it. Yep. Yeah, you can.
I have a strawberry plant at home. It's here.
Who's that?
Cesare. He wanted to tell you all about his strawberry plant.
Strawberries. Yeah. Strawberries are awesome, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's not dying.
Do you take care of it yourself?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
And I water it too.
Good on you.
Sometimes
Yeah. All right. We're gonna listen back on mute now, okay? Listen to what
anybody, let me put this over here with the keyboard. If you guys want me to send you some resources to follow up or do more study on or whatever, make sure you put your email in the chat, and I will do that in the next few days. I just want to make sure I get it. I don't leave anybody out. Yes. Yeah, please. I have no head. Yeah, please do. That's probably a good idea as well. So if there's anything you guys want to know, obviously I geek out pretty hard on this stuff. Feel free to hit me up at any time. I'm happy to talk about it. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can, or if I can't, I can probably point you at someone that might be more helpful. You know, it's all about greater than the sum of our parts. So if we can come together, I think you know, there's a lot of problems to be solved. You know, maybe we can. I don't think we'll save the world, but we can save a piece of it. You know, that's just what you can do.
Very cool. That's awesome.
Alrighty. Awesome. Feel
Thank
free
you
to
so much.
reuse it. I mean, if you pass it
Yeah, I
around,
did too.
just don't make it widely available, right? Because I didn't properly credit all the images, and I don't want it to get sued. But cool. Yeah. Right on.
All right.
Yeah, your pictures are great. Most of those are stock photos. Some of those I took off. Well, I have a list of, you know, Dovetail Inc., Ethical Net, Foundation, Louis Bedell, Permaculture Productions, permaculture.org.uk. I didn't take their pictures. I just displayed what they had. So they can be kind of litigious from what I understand. They're toothy.
Generally, it's mostly informational and you're not making money from it. You should be totally fine.
Yeah, I think that's fine. But you never know. People can be snarky.
You talked about them, exactly.